Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. I'm Allison Scobber, Consolidated Planning Group. We are a holistic special needs financial planning firm. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We're glad you're here. If you've been attending our webinars for a long time, we're certainly glad that you are back. Today, what we are talking about is supplemental security income and Medicaid, what happens when you work. But this is actually part two of a webinar. So our first webinar was done on February 5th, and that lives in on our Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel. And I'm going to put that in the chat for everybody. So if you haven't seen that first one, it might be valuable to go back and then listen to the first one that we did on February 5th, because we didn't quite get through all of the information. It's a lot. As you guys know, when we start talking about SSI and Medicaid, SSDI, all those kinds of things, I call it the 10,000-pound gorilla. It's a lot of information. So we're glad you're here. We're going to go through a lot of information with you today. We've got some write-in questions that we're going to go through. We invite everybody to put their questions in the chat box as we're going through the presentation. I'll be monitoring the chat box today for Nehtra. We've got Nehtra Davis-Moore with us with the Texas Workforce Commission. She's a subject matter expert on these topics, so we're excited to have her back with us. So in the spirit of getting through the information today, I'm going to go back to the slides where we were. Sorry, I'm going to have to click through these. And we're going to get started where we left off. And so again, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. We are definitely glad you're here. And I think you wanted to start at this student earned income exclusion right here. So Nehtra, thank you again for being here with us. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you for having me back. And good morning, everyone, or afternoon. I'm sorry. We just rolled over into noontime. We are going to jump in. Yes, we did part one and wanted to make sure everyone got the rest of the information, especially concerning work incentives, the SSI work incentives, because they are so important when it comes to how folks can be on SSI and work. So the first one, and actually this is probably actually going to address one of the questions that came in relation to how can one who is on SSI and be in college or in school. I think there was a question in relation to that. The student earned income exclusion is one of the best. It's actually my favorite SSI work incentive. And it is for those who are under age 22, who are regularly attending school and they're SSI recipients. Now, we see those dollar amounts in that third bullet, and oftentimes people are like, well, does Social Security send you, like a check for almost $10,000 up front? No, that's not how the student earned income exclusion works. How it works is in part one, we discussed the SSI equation on how Social Security calculates the cash benefit monthly. And so essentially the work incentives themselves are built into how Social Security does that equation. So the student earned income exclusion is one of those lines that you'll see on the calculation sheet that I shared with you guys back in February. So the student earned income exclusion is a number that does increase every year. And it's kind of cool to see that it is getting closer to almost $10,000 that can be deducted when someone is using the student earned income exclusion. It is a work incentive, like the rest of them, that has to be requested. And in order to request that, reaching out to your local SSA office. There's not a formal form, but we do have some template letters, Allison, that I can share with you guys if anyone is interested in it, that we've created over the years. But really and truly, it has to just be a written request to request that the student earned income exclusion be added to one's record, and with the including that someone is in fact attending school regularly. Next slide, thank you. So what does that regularly attending school mean, right? Well, you've got to be in school and attending at least 12 hours a week or college 8 hours a week. Training courses can also be included. And sometimes we've got a lot of kids who are doing homeschool. Homeschool does count as far as the student earned income exclusion goes, but it just needs to be making sure that those homeschool the homeschool students are following those Texas homeschool regulations. Next slide, please. Let's jump into the next set of work incentives. Now, the impairment related work expense and blind work expense are very similar. However, the blind work expense is pretty much as easy as I can put it. It is the impairment related work expense, but on steroids. That's how I've kind of trained my brain to think about the differences between the two. But both of these are SSI work incentives that are available for those who are on SSI. Next slide, please. So the impairment related work expense, also known as IRWI, which is a funny name, but in the benefits counseling world, we like, of course, we all like acronyms, and it's just easier to say than the long title of impairment related work expense. So IRWIs are expensive for items or services directly related to one's disability to help them remain working. So when you think work incentive, the big takeaway and thing to remember is work. You must be working to have a work incentives. So the impairment related work expense, if one is paying for something out of pocket that helps them sustain their employment and they're on SSI, they can request that that could be an IRWI that's added to their SSI record. Essentially, just like that student earned income exclusion, essentially what you will see that the IRWI is another added line in that calculation sheet that I shared. So it's built into that mathematical equation on how Social Security calculates that monthly cash benefit. So essentially what you will see with the impairment related work expenses is that essentially half of the money that you spend on a particular service or a combination of services, essentially half of that will be reflected back on one's SSI monthly cash benefit. Next slide, please.
I want to talk about this just a little bit more to give some examples. So, one example might be if a person doesn't drive and they have to Uber or they have to have someone get them to work. Is that an example of an employment related work expense? Or maybe
So
like somebody needing help getting ready for work, or if they had to have some type of attendant or some kind of help, or
if they're
like
paying
devices.
if they're paying for, let's say, for a job coach, for example, out of their pocket, not a job coach that's through, maybe if they have a Medicaid waiver or if they're getting job coaching from us through VR. But if they're in fact, because we do have some customers that are paying for like a job coach on their own, that could, for example, be considered an impairment work expense. If someone is paying for paratransit, that could be considered a work incentive. Yes, if someone is paying for that transportation, like in an Uber to get to and from work, yes, that too could be considered. For mileage, it has to be mileage in a modified vehicle for it to count as an impairment related work expense. So I do get that question a lot. Well, I take, my son or daughter to work. When it comes down to a family member providing the transportation, and if it's not, in a modified vehicle, Social Security doesn't typically honor that mileage from a family member taking, one to and from work. Um, does that kind of answer that
Yeah,
question
and,
in
and
more
and it
detail?
just so you can give us any other like examples that you've commonly seen, because I think sometimes we're so busy just living life, we forget some of the things
Yeah.
that we might be
So
doing to augment.
The easiest way, and one thing I learned, this was a few years ago, going to a national training for benefits counselors across the nation. And one thing that has stuck with me about IRWIs is if you need it for life, you need it for work. And so that's been the easiest way to think about IRWIs in the sense of, well, does this count as an IRWI? Does this count as an IRWI? It might. It very well might. The importance is you've got to be able to correlate what you're paying for and how, it's helping you sustain your employment, no matter, what your disability is. You're paying for it out of pocket. There's no other entity paying for that. And how it is helping you be able to go to work. You've got to tie it back to that employment and show that if you didn't have this, then you wouldn't be able to go to work. So if you need it for life, you need it for work. That's essentially the best way to think of impairment related work expenses.
I just wanted to mention one thing. We had a question in the chat box. One person said, if my daughter can only be driven to work by family because of the physical impairment Uber can't accommodate, how do I provide receipts or proof of payment? Would that then be approved if that was the case?
So if a family member is taking them, are you paying that family member? That would
So let's just say that they're paying that family member, but
my suggestion for IRWIs, possibly. All Social Security can say is yes, we can count that as an impairment related work expense, or no. They're not going to say, oh, you submitted, an IRWI request and we're going to stop your benefits. The best thing to do is if you think it could possibly be borderline on the fence that you probably could get it, I say ask for it. All Social Security is going to say is yes or no.
good. And I just wanted to mention here, I know in Harris County and Fort Bend County, they have disability public transportation, and it's like door to door pickup. And I think they charge
That's
$1 or $2 a ride, and it's on demand. You schedule it, they pick you up at your facility that are at your home. They do accommodate wheelchairs and other things like that. So if you don't know about that, research that on the transportation page for Harris and Fort Bend County. There's transfers and everything. It's worth looking into. I know I've had some clients that have used that in the past.
definitely. Definitely. And this is just some more, common ones that we see. But for example, I've had people buy like their own iPad, for example, and it helps them some of that assistive technology. But like, let's say, for example, the iPad was bought by a different entity, right? If it's not bought by the person receiving the SSI, then we can't count that as an IRWI. But if the person buys, their iPad on their own, for example, and they're needing that type of assisted technology to do their job, then that very well could count as an IRWI. And copays. Copays happen all the time. So pay attention to those copays and make sure you're saving your receipts, especially in the relation with work incentives. You just want to save everything in general. The blind work expense. So like I mentioned earlier, it's essentially just like impairment related work expenses, but it's impairment related work expense on steroids, because really and truly almost anything can be considered a blind work expense. So for those who are statutorily blind and who are on SSI, we highly recommend that people pay attention to what they are paying for, because they most likely have a blind work expense. The first one that stands out that I want folks to pay attention to is state and federal taxes, cost of uniforms, even the cost for if someone has a service animal. And when I say cost for related to the service animal, that is the food, that could be grooming, and any other tools that service animal might have. Childcare is even on there as a blind work expense. So please, please, if you are working with anyone, or if you have family members who are on SSI and who are coded as statutorily blind by Social Security's definition, they have blind work expenses, and they should definitely utilize them, because blind work expenses are dollar for dollar at that. So it's not even the same as inherent work expense. It's dollar for dollar when it comes to the blind work expense. I think we may have had a question about past plans. And so we'll jump into talking about past plans. But essentially, the biggest thing to take away in relation to past, it is kind of like an internal savings type of program for SSI recipients. But it's a very, very, very strict plan. So sometimes people ask, well, can I just do a past plan? And Social Security can, put my SSI in there. No. First rule, you can't put SSI money into a past plan. And I get that question often. So the easiest thing to think about past is if you have enough money and cushion to put your SSI into a past plan, you don't need SSI. So essentially, that's the best way to kind of think of that rule, because I do get that question often. Next slide.
And this is the plan for achieving self-support is what PASS stands for. We always throw these acronyms around, but PASS stands for Plan for Achieving Self-Support. So I just wanted to mention that because that's one of the ones that sometimes people haven't heard of.
Yes. And so you can be working, but you don't have to work. But it is attached directly to an employment goal. So the easiest one that I can say for an example is if someone is saving up for a car to get to and from work, they can save up for that car, and a certain amount will be, allotted to save up for that car in that past plan to meet that employment goal, and maintain that employment goal. But the key to what money has to go into a pass, you must have earned or unearned income to create a pass plan. Okay. Now, when we talk about unearned, it could be maybe you have gifts from family members, like monetary gifts. That money can go into a pass plan. Maybe you get a Title II benefit, such as maybe you're a childhood disability beneficiary, where you're getting a benefit from a parent. That money can go into a pass plan. Or if you have work earnings, you can put money from working into a pass plan. But you must be able to. The reason why pass plans are so strict, and they're very complicated as far as keeping up with them and maintaining them, all the documentation that goes along with it, and just maintaining that you're moving along, like making the progress with the past plan to achieve the employment goal. It takes a lot of work, but ultimately you have to be able to prove that you can live on the amount, whatever you have left over outside of the past. And it's important to note that because, like I said, it's like an internal savings program to help people kind of adjust to, okay, this is how much I can put away and still maintain and take care of myself. But the purpose of the plan is ultimately to significantly reduce the reliance on that SSI cash benefit, because it's not a lifelong benefit, right? We're just in that the generation after generation of being on SSI, but ultimately the past plans were designed to help people understand that they don't have to live off of SSI. Next slide, please. So all past savings must be spent on what is approved. So let's stick with that same employment goal that I mentioned just a second ago about saving up for a car. You've got to buy the car. Okay. Let's say you get the past plan approved and it was to save up for a car, but you end up purchasing maybe a house. You're going to get hit with an overpayment because that's not what the past plan was agreed to. Social Security will review past plans at least once a year. And it's very, very important to be very organized or have a strong support system to keep up with the past plans. And we always suggest to never use paid staff with help on monitoring a pass, because it's better with the natural support so you can kind of keep up what's going on with the pass and make sure things are moving along properly. Because say, for example, paid staff, they get a better opportunity and they've been monitoring the pass, and then someone has to sweep in and try to pick up where that pass, the monitoring left off. It doesn't make it kind of confusing. So we typically suggest that there's a natural support that's going to be consistently in a person's life, to help monitor pass, because sometimes the passes can take a little while to obtain the employment goal. We also have had on that last bullet where it says students and individuals saving up for their own business. One of the most successful ones that I can speak to is actually a gentleman who started a pool cleaning company, and he utilized the pass by doing that. He saved up to buy all his materials for a pool cleaning company, and he was able to start his own business doing that. But he did that by utilizing a pass, and eventually he worked himself completely off of SSI and owning his business. Next slide, please. So there was another question that came up about, I think, losing or keeping Medicaid when you're on SSI. And 1619B is one of those very, very important things to remember. 1619B is what protects Medicaid for those who are working and on SSI. Next slide, please. So how much can one who is on SSI work and earn? For this year, actually, I've got a typo, Allison. I need to change that for you guys. It actually went up recently. It is 53,000. It's over 53,000 now, $501. So this year, SSI recipients can earn up to $53,501 in gross annual income this year and still keep Medicaid. They won't have to pay for their Medicaid. They still keep free Medicaid. So SSI recipient, they keep their SSI status, working and earning. Their cash benefit is going to go down to zero, but they are working and earning their own money. So it's very important to note this because I get this question all the time. How much can I earn and work when I'm on SSI? And when we say this number, people are like, there's no way, that's not true. How is that true? Because Social Security told me that I could only work 20 hours when I went to the Social Security office. Yeah. One thing I want you also to take away, so the Social Security office, the claims rep in the offices, they'll tell you things all the time. 9.5 times out of 10, it's probably not all the way accurate. And this is one of those things. So when you've got someone who is like, I can only work 20 hours a week at this much an hour. No, that's not the case. We need to remember 1619B. A lot of times I get the question, well, don't I have to at least be earning $1 in SSI to keep my Medicaid going? No. Even if that SSI goes down to zero from working, if you are not over this threshold, that 1619B threshold, you still have your Medicaid and you still technically have your SSI status. Now, let's talk about if you did go over the 1619B, just the state threshold. There is what's known as an individualized threshold, where you could possibly have a threshold that is higher than this. However, a lot of people don't end up qualifying for the individualized threshold because what happens is there has to be a lot of Medicaid expenditures, like you have to have a lot of medical costs to weigh that. But a lot of times people don't qualify for the individualized threshold. And then that's when we start looking at other avenues, and it'll come up shortly here, known as the Medicaid buy-in. I see a question about how do you implement 1619B? 1619B is something that happens automatically. It's a protected section within the Social Security Act. It's literally 1619B, and it protects Medicaid for those who are working. So there's nothing that you have to do. You don't have to apply for it. It's something that happens automatically.
I think some of where this might be coming from is, Medicaid and Health and Human Services. And I know people attend from all across the US. But speaking of Texas, there has been some challenge with this, with the 1619B and it being implemented properly and other things like that. And I want to just be clear, because sometimes there is confusion. Working in SSI and working while getting SSDI, it's two different programs, but there has been some issues with Health and Human Services, and there's probably somebody on here that has affected them. Do you have any tips for them? I know that this is a protected class, but sometimes what I've seen is that the applications get routed improperly to the wrong department. They don't understand it's, a protected or whatever's happening, but we've just seen some issues. Can you talk about that?
So so there's, if you're talking about protected class like this, our special populations for former SSI recipients,
For
we
people
do.
that moved over from SSI to SSDI, I think that that's where there's been some issues on these protected classes,
So for
with the Health
SS,
and Human Services.
so for those, if they're strictly just receiving SSDI, if they were receiving SSI and let's say they had a cost of living increase where it switched them to SSDI, those folks are known as pickles, which are in the group of former SSI recipients, and you can get Medicaid back in those situations. This is different than that. 1619B and that situation are different. So if we have a person who starts receiving SSDI due to a cost of living adjustment, right? So they moved from SSI over to DI because of that cost of living, and it caused their SSI to stop. Now they're getting DI. Well, when that SSI stopped, that Medicaid stopped as well. And so, in order to get the Medicaid back in Texas, you can't do that because pickles are included into the special groups of former SSI recipients. But in order to get that Medicaid back, there is a form known as the H1200, HHSC H1200 to get filled out.
And that's a
So,
form that you guys can download online, or you can also
mhm.
go to yourtexasbenefits.com and you can fill it out online. So, and we can one off on that, but I do know that there's been a lot of people that we've talked to, honestly, since COVID, since that COVID thing lifted or whatever, where people have had some issues with Medicaid.
the
But
other the
I
other
just want
thing
to
I'll
say, don't
mention
give up
about
on that. Don't just accept it because it's probably a mistake. They're understaffed, overworked, but pursue it.
the other thing that I'll mention in relation to Medicaid. So across the nation, after the public health emergency ended and wrapped up, states went through what's known as the Medicaid unwinding process. And so during the public health emergency, they didn't stop Medicaid for those who maybe were not eligible to receive Medicaid during the public health emergency time. The states went through Medicaid unwinding process, and what happened is now that we're seeing that Medicaid unwinding process coming to a close, some people who weren't eligible to receive Medicaid, they were, and now it's tearing off, it's stopping because of that Medicaid unwinding process. So there may be some issues like that as well going on. Any other questions about Medicaid and that stopping?
I think we're good on that. Thank you, Nehtra.
Okay. Next slide. So I touched on, if you don't meet that threshold, let's say you're over the 1619 big threshold, let's say you don't qualify for an individualized threshold under 1619B, then you can start looking at, if you're working, okay, and you're outside of that, and let's just say you're in your career and you're rocking and rolling. The Medicaid buy-in is a great resource for those who have exceeded that state threshold and don't qualify for an individualized threshold. The one big takeaway that I want you to remember for a Medicaid buy-in is that you have to be working to get the Medicaid buy-in. Okay. Now, to get Medicaid buy-in, there is a cost related to that, right? It says buy-in. So there would be up to $40 per month to pay for that when we're talking about the Medicaid buy-in. Now, There is a form for Medicaid buy-in, and it's not like just the regular H1200. If you're looking to do Medicaid buy-in, okay, you're working and you're looking to do Medicaid buy-in because you're worried about being over that 1619B threshold, okay, you're going to look for the H1200 MBI. Okay, it's different than the regular H1200 that we mentioned to get back onto Medicaid when it stopped because of that cost of living increase. But for Medicaid buy-in, it's the H1200, HHSC H1200 MBI. Next slide, please. Overpayments are going to happen. You're right. Overpayments are going to happen. I wish I could say that overpayments never happened, but they happen. They are going to happen. The best defense, or an offense, depending on which way you look at it, right, is to report regularly. Report. Oftentimes, folks will come to me and say, well, I got an overpayment notice from Social Security saying I owe da 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 da. Typically, as a benefits counselor, my first question will be, did you report your earnings to Social Security every month? Now, I get that question, I'm like, well, what do you mean, did I report my earnings? I'm not working. Did you report all of your earnings? That means earned income if you're working, or unearned income. And when I say report your income, I mean down to every last dollar. You're technically supposed to. I know some of us might like scratch offs, for example, or some of us may go play bingo. Or some of us may go down, to Louisiana to a casino, for example. Those are, and let's say you win, right? That's considered unearned income. And when you're on SSI, you're supposed to report those things to Social Security. So when I say report all earnings, I do mean unearned and earned income if you're working to Social Security. Keep records of everything. Keep records of everything forever. Whatever correspondence you send to Social Security, keep it. Whatever correspondence Social Security sends to you, keep it. I get the question, how long do I keep it? I want you guys to keep everything forever. If you are good at electronic data keeping, it's a great way to do that, because I know it can be a lot of paper, but please, please don't throw anything away. Do not throw any documentation away. And the reason why I say that is when it comes time to deal with an overpayment, you're gonna need that historical documentation to know how to navigate through the overpayment. Knowing the overpayment rules are very important. And we like overpayment. We like that they exist, but it's important to know how to navigate through overpayments, because they can weigh people down tremendously. They can weigh you down tremendously. And if you don't do anything else, do not ignore the overpayment notices. I had someone literally tell me, I just throw those away. No, don't throw those away. We need the overpayment notices, even if you can't understand a lick of what's in that letter. Please reach out to an entity such as myself, who's certified by Social Security. I don't work for Social Security, but I'm certified by Social Security to understand the disability programs and how to navigate through some of those issues. And those letters that Social Security sends, we can understand those letters and see what we need to do to tackle it. Worst case scenario for overpayments, what you want to make sure to do is set up a payment plan. Set up a payment plan. Don't ignore it, but worst case scenario, if you have no clue on what to do, set up a payment plan.
Now, one of the things that I recently saw, I saw something that they were changing the deal on what they do with overpayments. And so historically, what they've done when they've overpaid you, you owe them money back. Then they will take 10% out of your check each month until it's paid up back. And I've seen that there is something that was passed that they're going to start taking 100% back. So that may have people going into a category where they're not going to get a check for a few months or however long. I don't know if they've implemented that. I know that that's coming, and I did see that it's not retroactive. So, meaning if you're already on a payment plan and they're taking 10% out of your check every month, that will continue. It's the new ones. So, I did see that, and I just wanted to further, I'm in a huge agreement of keeping everything. And I'm a fan of scanning it and saving it in a SSI folder on your computer. The other thing that I do, it might be a little extra, but I have to tell you, it's helped me many, many times over the years with my family member. I keep a Word document of every time I call them, the date, who did I talk to, what is the extension, what did they say they were going to do, what did they confirm receipt of, what did I say I was going to do? Because over the years, it's a lot. I have one kid, and I think that Word document is like 30 pages long, but you talk to a lot of different people. Extensions at the Social Security Administration are like gold. You should always ask the person for their extension. They may or may not give it to you, but write it down, because a lot of times it's very hard to get through at the Social Security Administration. So I can't tell you how many times I've gone back, and because I had asked for the name and asked for the extension number, that I was able to specifically leave a message for somebody that might be able to help me on a future matter. So I would tell you it's been a lot of work, but it was totally worth it. And I strongly recommend that you keep that kind of documentation with your phone calls. It's important.
Yes, you are absolutely on it, Allison. Saving everything is extremely important. I often tell folks, come up with a system that works for you. If you're paper based, then I suggest that you get a spiral and you label that spiral 2025. And for every time you call in, you jot down a little synopsis of what was discussed when you called in, who you talked to, what time, what date. And then you've got, on top of that, you've got a file box that has manila folders in it. You can say that that's your 2025 box from January to December. Whatever you send to Social Security, whatever you receive, you put it in the respective month and keep it. And keep that spiral on top. And then when the year is over, you can bundle it up, put it in a nice little ribbon and bow, and store it if you're paper based.
Yeah.
But I definitely recommend, highly recommend, that keeping and maintaining records is so important.
We have
Um,
several things in the chat box, but I also just
yes,
wanted to say that you can also apply to have the back payment stricken. There are forms that you can download and file to have the overpayment stricken. That is something that you can do, and it's worth doing. And then, so when somebody said, does reportable income include interest earned in savings?
does reportable income include interest earned in savings
That
account?
would be unearned income, I think.
Yeah, that's unearned.
Another
That would fall
person
under unearned. And
said,
in that sense, it would depend on if you're on a Title II, or this session still is SSI.
right,
So I don't want to get too
get
deep on that.
complicated.
Yeah.
SSI, when they owe you money, they parse it out. Like they don't give you all the back pay that they owe you all at once. I think, don't they spread that out over six
They
month
typically
periods or
they
something like that?
typically will they typically will spread it out depending on how much it is. And then they'll give you a certain time frame in between to spend it down. And if you are having issues, spending things down, that's a good time to look at an able account
Yes,
and move
and
some of
we
that
can help you
around.
guys with that. One thing, someone said, a little bit of off topic, and I want to make
Mhm.
clear that it is off topic because we're talking about SSI today, but they want to know, should
Okay.
you report your income, your paychecks monthly when you're on
Yes.
SSDI?
Technically, you're supposed to change report when there's, just a change, even in a cent. And so that's why we
For
typically say,
SSDI, yes.
we suggest report monthly, whether you're on SSI or a Title II benefit such as SSDI. Report monthly.
It's
You
the
can, you
SSI is
can
due
in
on the
there.
1st and late on the 5th, and I strongly recommend reporting that income monthly on the first of each month. And that is going to help you prevent an overpayment to where they've overpaid you and you owe them back. So reporting that, and then once they have the employer, they know the person is working, the employer's in the system, then you can log into your social security and you can upload, you can put that information right on the portal and upload stubs. It's actually pretty easy. So don't beat yourself up if you haven't done it, but going forward, it is a best practice to do it monthly and just schedule a reminder on your phone to do it on the first.
Yeah,
Let's see. And then how do we know if the employer in the My Wage report system? They'll let you know. You're going to have to
they'll let you
talk
know.
to somebody live. So you don't like when they add the employer, they'll let you know. On that, you'll have to talk to somebody live. Is there a different place to report wages in SSDI? My son has both SSI and SSDI.
Yes, there are Title 16 SSI claims reps, and there's Title 2, which SSDI falls under that, claims reps. So you do want to report on both sides. Yes.
And then the other thing, somebody said that their kid is getting a really low amount, and it might be because they're working and it's being reduced for their earnings if they don't have a student earned income exclusion if they're not, a full-time student. It might be because of a back pay situation where you owe them money. And if you want a specific accounting of that, you can request that in writing by letter. You can fax it in, you can go into the office. But you can certainly request if you've misplaced the letter that they sent or you didn't get the letter, you can certainly request an accounting of that. One last thing on the back pay, on if you owe them money, they may send you a letter and they say you owe us $10,000, and you might think, okay, well, they did overpay us. I knew they were overpaying us, so we were setting that money aside. I'm just going to send them the check for that. You can do that, and depending on how they're going to handle back pays, if they're going to take 100% or if it's only going to be 10% going forward. It has been 10% in the past. Historically, I've not been a fan of stroking a check of the $10,000 and paying it right back. And it's not because I'm trying to keep it for myself, but what has happened to us before is they take and they cash the check, but they don't apply it appropriately. And then you're still being dinged 10% on the monthly thing. And it might take months and months and months to get it worked out. But you could probably alleviate that by going into the office and paying the back pay. So there may be some other ideas. What do you think about that, Nitra?
Um, in overpayment situations where I've kind of seen that Social Security is just continuing to send. I've and even when you've called and say, stop sending me the check, um, I have actually told some customers to literally just open another account, have it routed there, and when the letter comes, you're ready to pay it. I've had that happen more often than not, unfortunately, especially in relation to those who are on the Title II side. Not so much SSI, but definitely on the Title II side.
I've seen it come
Uh,
back on the SSI side where they weren't
Resource
aware that
issues.
child support was continuing, and then snap, like, oh, 5 years. Like, the thing is it can add up really quickly.
Yep.
So don't think just because 2 years have gone by and they haven't caught it that they won't catch it. They're going to catch it. They're going to catch it, and they're going to take corrective action. So the best defense is to just tell them this is what's going on,
Yep.
and have them fix it so that way you're not. I mean, I've had people really, really upset, nervous, anxious, everything about these overpayments. It is a big deal. So just, look at all of that.
Yeah, and when you're reporting, if you have a work incentive, I see there's a question about if you have an ERU request. If you have a work incentive, you've got to do that. You've got to submit documentation, supporting documentation, along with your pay stubs, right? If you have a work incentive on your record, you've got to do that by mail, or you can do it in person and hand things off that way. But you can't upload that documentation. You can't do that electronically. I think that they're maybe working to get more sophisticated in that realm to be able to do things online. But as of right now, you've got to do it by mail or hand that off in person when you've got work incentives.
And also with the incentives, just like the student earned income exclusion, it's not an automatic. They have to approve it. You have to ask for
Right.
the student earned income exclusions. You have to ask for the IRWI. You can't just send them in and expect them to deduct them. Like it's a process. Because I've seen people where they've sent stuff in and then they weren't happy that it wasn't processed, but it wasn't already in place, is my point.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, we touched on that. So here's a slide about the ABLE accounts. And like Allison said, you know, CPG can help out with ABLE accounts, but the it's kind of funny and kind of bad the way I describe ABLE accounts, but it's how my brain helped remember it. But it's a legal way to launder money. And so that's how I've been able to kind of understand the idea about able accounts, because when the able accounts first came about and I was trying to understand, the logistics of how they operate, I was like, I don't know if I really get this. And I couldn't understand, like, how is this possible? Because it did seem like, like you're kind of laundering money, right? But then it clicked. I was like, but it's legal. So it is essentially like a legal way to launder money. But it's a great resource to be able to leave your family member something. And able accounts were really created for that. For me, working in the disability community for so many years, and seeing families not be able to leave, their loved one who may be on SSI and Medicaid, anything, it has been heartbreaking to see over the years. And so knowing that able accounts now exist, it somewhat gives that relief. And to have those hard conversations with families, to do kind of that long-term planning, for, when you're not here anymore as a mom or dad. What's going to happen to your child that has disabilities? Can you leave them anything? Well, with able accounts, you can. And so
I just want
I,
to chime in on that though, because one
yeah.
thing that is a little bit different than the ABLE account and the special needs trust, a
Mhm,
special needs trust can be a beneficiary on your life insurance or
mhm.
investment accounts and things like that. An ABLE account actually cannot be the beneficiary. And sometimes we get a question a lot, Nidra, of why do I need an ABLE account and why do I need a special needs trust? It's
The
because
difference.
an ABLE account can pay for shelter without a
Yes.
one-third reduction to
Flexible.
SSI, and a special needs trust, although it can pay for shelter, there would be a one-third reduction to SSI. And again, the ABLE account has that 100,000 total before you disqualify for things. And what we're trying to do is to stay Medicaid eligible. So for a lot of states, Texas included, that $2,000, you can't have more than $2,000 in the person's name outside of an ABLE account or a special needs trust. So an ABLE account is going to help you maintain eligibility for these programs while having more than $2,000 for that individual and their care needs. And we do entire presentations on this. Money grows tax-free. It's tax-free distributions. If it can be construed as achieving a better life for an individual with a disability, you can pay for it out of an ABLE account. But I'm a huge advocate of having both. A special needs trust, this is how we leave life insurance proceeds or assets or things like that to a trust,
Yeah.
and you can have an unlimited amount of money that you give. And then there's a limited amount of money each year. It follows the gift tax exclusion, and it is 19,000 for 2025. And if the person is working, you see on the screen 15,560, an additional 15,560 up to their earnings amount. So if they're working and they only earned 5,000, they can put the 19,000 in for 2025, and they can put an additional 5,000 up to their full earnings amount, up to the 15,560. Always just like to give clarification on that because sometimes there is some confusion on that.
Definitely. The able account does allow for that flexibility, the flexibility to live in real time, I feel like.
Somebody said, can the special needs trust put money into the ABLE account? You can. But on a third party, and that's a kind of a whole nother webinar, but there are first party special needs trusts that have a Medicaid payback. There are third party special needs trusts that don't have a Medicaid payback. As of right now in the state of Texas, some states are different. Some states don't have a Medicaid payback, but the ABLE accounts in Texas do have a Medicaid payback. So normally what we would do is leave money to a third party special needs trust without a Medicaid payback. So most of the time people, unless it's totally necessary, are not going to move money from something that doesn't have a Medicaid payback to something that does. But when there is a first party special needs trust, examples of first party special needs trust might be child support is going to it. There could have been a lawsuit or a settlement. It could be the person's earnings because the person with the disability is working. That is a first party special needs trust. And yes, you can move money back and forth from ABLE to the special needs trust or vice versa. So that is a good question.
So wrapping up, we're getting close to the end here, but it's always cool to kind of put everything in a cute little nutshell and some takeaways. Um, so Social Security SSI, that's what we're focused on in the part one and the part two today. It's determined by a formula, mathematical formula. Individuals typically always have more money when they work and are on SSI. And that Medicaid that's connected to SSI is going to continue. And that number is $53,501 for this year. That is the new 1619B threshold amount. Next slide. And there is my contact information. And I think we've got
So
maybe a few more minutes for
yeah, we may
questions.
have a few others, but I think and I want to do this with you about switching from SSI to SSD. I think we should do another presentation on that because
Yeah.
and one of the things I like to tell people about is the Social Security Red Book. And first I always like to say there is no black book. There's the Social Security Blue Book, which is the medical impairment guide of kind of what the guidelines that they use to approve disability. That's the Blue Book. The Social Security Red Book is how working impacts benefits, and you can download this from the Social Security website. And it has the different programs. It talks about SSI, it talks about SSDI, it talks about how working impacts the different programs. So we will talk about switching from SSI to SSDI, or also known for many, many years, they called it DAC, Disabled Adult Child. And I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, they changed the name to Childhood Disability Benefits. And this is where when we have a child who has a disability, whose disability started prior to age 22, they can be covered under our record when we either start drawing Social Security disability ourselves or Social Security retirement. That is when there is a switchover, and you guys have heard about this in the disability community, where they basically switch over from SSI to SSDI, or childhood disability benefits under a parent's record. And sometimes, and I run into this, and somebody already said this in the chat box, sometimes they might still be getting some SSI, they might be getting some SSDI under their own record because they've worked, and they may also be getting CDB. I run into 2 or 3 a year that's getting all three, like some of each of those. But oftentimes we'll see people that are getting SSI and then some SSI and some childhood disability benefits. But there is help for you guys. So I know that this is complicated. Nehtra is definitely a source. Imagine Enterprises is definitely another source. There is free benefit counseling. So you can go on the Social Security website and type in benefit counseling. There is free benefit counseling. So if you wanted to know what happens if I work, am I going to lose Medicaid? What do I need to, go through? I strongly suggest that you guys go through that process and learn, because everybody's little situation is different. There is also something called a work subsidy form. And Nehtra, if you know the form number, I'll look it up. Uh, a work subsidy form is like, so some of our kids are working, but they're really not able to do the full job that they're with an employer that supports people with disabilities, but they're really not capable of doing the whole job. They're not at risk of losing their job, but maybe they're only handling 50% of the job duties. There is a work subsidy form with the Social Security Administration, and if that is signed off by the employer, then there may be some earnings that they won't count against that person as far as reducing that amount. What is that number? Is it 630?
So, so special condition and subsidies is a work incentive available for Title II recipients. It's not an SSI
So
thing.
only for Title II, but for Title II, then it may not be counted. Do you remember the name of that form? I'm gonna look it up.
I know that we have kind of like a very similar to the student income exclusion template form. We have a template form to calculate the
It's
subsidies that I can share
it's
with
the
you.
SSA 3033. So I'm gonna put that in the chat box. SSA 3033 is the work subsidy, and again, that is gonna be
That's what
for
the
the
employer that's what the employer will fill out. But in order to get, because when we're talking about special conditions and subsidies, you got to put a number on it, right? We need to put a number on it. And so to calculate that out, and when I say put a number, I mean a dollar amount. To calculate that out, we have a template to
perfect.
calculate. Yeah. And also too, I just wanted to add, I know that you mentioned free benefits counseling. VR does have benefits counseling as well, and it is a substantial service through VR. So you could literally come to VR just for benefits counseling alone, if you wanted to. So just to mention that, and we have contracted, providers with us. Imagine being one of them.
And I can just echo that and just say that over the years, I've talked to several of the subject matter experts like Nehtra. They're very knowledgeable and very helpful. So the point is if you're feeling overwhelmed by this and all these acronyms that they throw around that sound the same but aren't the same, and some of them are the same, it's so confusing and you need help, there is help out there for you. You don't have to be a millionaire. You don't have to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars to get this kind of help. I just want to encourage you that there is definitely help out there. And I'm a fan. I've heard of, from some parents, well, I'm just not going to let them work. No, let them work. Let them grow their skills. Let them have community. If they have the ability to work and grow their skills and earn some money, 967 isn't making anybody rich. And that's what the SSI amount is, monthly is 967. So because there are programs, and we didn't get into all of this today, but there's 5 phases of work. So they understand, because sometimes people feel, Nitra, that, oh my gosh, if I get SSI the minute I go to work, they're going to just cancel everything. It took me a year and a half to get this, and now they're just going to cancel it. There are phases of work that they're looking at, and they don't just stop everything. And that Social Security Red Book, we've done webinars and we've discussed the 5 phases of work before. The benefit counselors will be able to discuss those with you. But the 5 phases of work are designed to let the person with a disability try their hand at working to see if it's going to be a fit. They understand that some people really want to work but may not be able to, but they at least want to try. So just know that there are definitely programs out there for that. Did you want to mention any of that, or chime in on that?
Um, you know, the biggest thing that I think gets missing in translation when it comes to, especially the Title II programs. Title II really was designed, and this it takes time to even get to the understanding of how the programs, were developed and how they were designed. But Title II specifically was designed to keep up with a person's ability to work or not. And I think often I don't give Social Security a lot of credit, okay? But I do like to give credit. I call them the gnomes in the Social Security basement somewhere creating all these wackadoodle rules. But they really did think about the processes really well when it comes to how how to make your benefits work with the work you want to do. And I think that's one takeaway. If you take anything away today, right? A lot of people hear that myth of I can't work and be on benefits. But please switch that and switch your thinking to where do I go to get my benefits to work with the work that I want to do? And when you think about it that way, your mind can be more open to receiving the information. And it does take meeting with the right people. And the one place I don't want you to go when you have questions is the Social Security office. Reach out to the right folks. I'm one of those right folks. You can come again to VR for benefits counseling. I saw a question in there. Please reach out to me, Tamara. If you can reach out to me about. They said that they can only do it once. That's not true. That's like going to one counseling session. It's benefits
There's a
counseling.
lot of misinformation out
Yeah.
there, and I would
So
always just like to say, just give yourself some credit. You guys are smart people, veteran parents here, and yes, this is hard. But when you hear something that seems a little bit crazy, it probably is wrong. I I jokingly say that if I ever had time, I could write a book on the funny things that have come out of the Social Security Administration and Health and Human Services or Medicaid. It would be very funny, but it's
yeah.
not funny when you're going through it. It's really tough, and but there is definitely help. We're nationally certified as Social Security advisors, members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. We can help you on your planning journey. Texas Workforce Commission, again, benefits counseling. There's so much stuff out there, so much help. So just be encouraged with that. We are going to do another webinar with Nehtra, and we're going to talk about moving over from SSI to RSDI or SSDI, childhood disability benefits. They throw it all around, but we're going to talk about working on those programs and different things that you need to be aware of for that. So for today, as we're wrapping up, everybody's going to get a copy of today's slides and a link to the recording. We're also going to include, well, today's slides are the slide deck from February 5th, but we will also include the recording from February 5th, so you can see the first half of the webinar. And we will also include those letters that Nehtra mentioned as well. So thanks everyone for being here with us today. Nehtra, thank you for partnering with us again. It's always a wealth of information, and we'll look forward to partnering with you again soon.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye now.
Bye.